This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
Real conversations and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back. Nathan Romas with you. Today we are going to be talking about a human trafficking story. So give right at the top here just kind of an explicit warning. So there are going to be some things in here that may be triggering to some people. Maybe some people have some different experiences with something similar. So I just wanted to make sure we note that right off the top. So my guest today was kind enough to actually write up an introduction for me. So you're one of the first to do that. So I'm happy you did that. It totally helps. So just to introduce you to Callie Love, who's here with me. She's a survivor turned advocate who has transformed her lived experiences into a powerful mission to combat sex trafficking and empower survivors. Homeless at 13 and battling addiction by 14, she is now a thriving business owner and founder of Phoenix Arise Foundation. Through workshops and communities, Callie equips youth and adults and parents with critical tools to recognize grooming, address trauma, and foster resilience. With plans to open a rehabilitation center for survivors, she's shaping a safer future and creating lasting change in the fight against exploitation. So welcome, Callie.
Thank you so much for having me. This means the world to be able to finally, come on and share my story.
Yeah, I want to say it's not easy finding somebody who will talk about this stuff, and for obvious reasons. But I think especially the component here where it's personal to you, it is your story, I think makes it that much more interesting, but that much more real. So thank you for reaching out and asking to tell your story. So just so listeners know, we had a bit of a discussion before the show, just kind of going through some of the stuff. I was really intrigued by some of the things that you were talking about, and we'll get into the details of that. But especially working in the gang unit here in Edmonton, and I've worked with some of our human exploitation units where they're trying to combat these things. Obviously, I've been involved in some of these stings and different things they've done. So some of this was very interesting to me. But I want to kind of dive right into your story. So if you want to start us from the top and kind of guide us through the story, and I'll interject with some questions as we go along.
Well, it starts when I was very young, from the ages of 3 to 9. My mom and I didn't have a very strong relationship. Imagine at the ages of 3 saying that. She was going out basically every single weekend and Wednesday, and she was on a pool league where basically they go to a bar and they practice playing pool, and then they'd go through championships. And during that time, she would leave me alone with our downstairs neighbor, who was my babysitter at the time, and he would sexually assault me. And this happened for, like I said, between the ages of 3 to 9. So it was very prevalent. And very quickly, I would say around ages 4 to 5, I started talking out about it. And I started saying that my babysitter, Dan, was forcing me to play these games. Obviously, I was using different terms at the time. And I had told my mom, and my mom told me that I was making it up. So then I started going to my papa at the time and telling him, which he ended up bringing me to the police and tried to do a formal statement. The games would include things like I would have to watch porn with him and basically copy whatever the women were doing at the time. And during that time, that would include things like sucking him off, or I'd have to go and touch myself and do different things like, allow him to touch me or kiss me. And during that, if I didn't listen, he would get mad and he would tell me things like he would tell my mom I wasn't listening. And there'd be times where I remember he would bribe me with like Oreo cookies that he would have in his basement specifically for whenever I'd come. And he was babysitting me. And I remember telling my mom, like I didn't like the games, and there'd be times when he would touch me, like in, my vagina area, and it would end up hurting. And my mom used to just tell me, like, oh, I was making it up. I was having, I was lying. And then I ended up telling my papa, he went to the police. The police actually ended up coming to my house, and my mom told them that I was making it up.
And as Papa, you're saying mean like Grandpa? Okay. Where's the rest of your family at this time? Like father, or is there any other family around?
So my father, it's never been confirmed that he actually is my father. My mom wasn't 100% sure who my father was at the time.
Okay.
And I only met him once when I was 16. And the rest of my family didn't like my mom or her mom. So we were very isolated from everybody. There was a few times
Mm.
where we did end up going to like a family dinner or something like that. Um, but my family very much did not like us,
Yeah.
just because I guess, the drama that was going on the backside. Um, and during this time, it was very hard, trying to explain to people that I was going through something that I didn't like and nobody believing me. That for my papa, children aid services ended up getting involved. And around the time that children aid services started getting involved, my mom started to become very abusive. Um,
Mm.
and she started to blame me, saying that I needed to stop going and telling people things, that I was going to get her in trouble, that I was ungrateful. And I remember, like, from a very young age, my mom calling me things like a bitch and telling me that she wished I was never born. And during this time, like, obviously, I'm still being assaulted. And around 9 years old, we ended up moving out of the house and we went to a new house. And there was a few times where he still came over and babysat me in the new house. And within the next, I would say, year or two, um, another, group of teenagers ended up moving into the house with the guy who was renting out the entire place. And unfortunately, due to that, and due to Dan living in the basement, he started drugging them and assaulting them.
Mm.
So very quickly, it became rumored that he was assaulting other girls. And at first, nobody believed them until they went to the police. And then the police did a full investigation. I don't know what that entailed at the time, but from my understanding, what ended up happening was they found videos on like floppy disk drives.
Hmm.
And it was of, the two teenage girls, as well as videos going back of me from when I was a child.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And during that time, the police ended up coming to our house and asking if my mom would like to, go to court or press charges. I'm not really sure how that conversation went because I wasn't part of it and I was so young. But my mom basically slammed the door in the police face and blamed me for it right after she closed the door, telling me that I was making up lies and I must have been promiscuous. I must have done something. Somehow, some way, this was my fault that her best friend was being arrested.
Even though there are other victims
Yeah,
now, other people coming forward. So
exactly.
one thing I wanted to ask too on this was, so when between 3 to 9, like how does this person groom you? How do they make it okay make a kid feel like this is an okay situation?
So yeah, he would start bribing me with Oreo cookies. And a lot of the times it did start simply with like tickling or things like that. And then we would slowly move to the basement. Um, and he would show me like girls who were also very young at the time on like his TV in his room. And he would basically get me to copy them and say things like, oh, this is just a fun little game. Or, if you do this, then I'll give you a bunch of Oreos and you can just stay up all night and watch TV until your mom gets home.
So is he like the girls on the TV though? Is that Like
Yes.
he's showing you other pornographic images of them? Okay.
And then, so yeah, it was very much one of those things where it started off as like tickling and, playing a game with trying to basically who can pull down the other person's pants the most or the fastest. Um, and very quickly, it moved from me just having to suck him off, which was what it was in the beginning, to him wanting to do more things to me.
Mm.
Which ended up, hurting, which is why I started to speak out about it because I just didn't understand what was happening, but I knew it was hurting my body and I didn't like it.
Yeah, and I guess, especially at that age, you don't have the words to describe any of that stuff. So, yeah, I can see how that would be very difficult. You and then your mom not believing you on top of that. When you look back at it now, do you think was she just kind of lacking? Um, I don't know. Was she just lacking like a way to help you? Like, does she just not have the tools, the resources? I'm not trying to make excuses for it. I'm just trying to think like, what would be the reason she wouldn't listen to her own kid about these situations?
Of course, I'll never know what was going through my mom's head at the time. But for me, looking back on everything, I just feel like my mom didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I feel like for her, ignoring it was better than accepting what was actually happening. Um, and I also feel like she not only didn't understand, but she also knew if she was to admit to that and go and get, like police involved and all this other stuff, she would lose on a babysitter. And she would basically end up at the time before we moved, she would have lost her place where we were living and she would have had nowhere else to live.
Mm.
And she also had this issue of feeling like she needed to be perfect in everybody's eyes. Um, and admitting that would have meant having to tell her other friend who lived in the house as well that this was happening and that she had known of it for how many years at this point. Um, and I really do feel like for her, she just didn't have the resources or the knowledge. And I also know she has severe mental health issues that she's never gotten addressed.
Okay.
So I definitely feel like that affected her ability to even parent as well.
Was there any addictions involved with her? Like, does she have anything?
So my mom used to take Demerol, which is a pill that's supposed to help pain in the back, or well, for her back. But she wasn't prescribed it, so she would get it off of my babysitter,
Okay.
and my babysitter would never charge her to babysit me.
Mm.
And there was a lot of the times where, even though my mom says she never had an active addiction, I remember her popping one or two Demerols and being like completely knocked out for the rest of the day and like unable to do anything.
Wow. Okay. So we're kind of at the part of the story. So you're about 10 years old now. And you were just talking about being assaulted by another one of your mom's friends.
Yeah, so for about, I would say, a couple months prior to that incident, um, the guy's name was Brad. He had been telling me that he has this beautiful cottage and that he would love to take me out there. And I loved nature. I absolutely loved it. And at this point, I thought, this guy, Brad, was amazing. He was so nice. He would always buy me gifts. And there'd be times where, my mom would like yell at me or go to hit me. And he was kind of the very first person next to my papa to intervene and be like, hey, we don't have to act like this.
Hmm.
So my mom hated going outside. My mom hated anything to do with bugs or nature. So she didn't want to go. And I remember begging her, please, please, please let me go. Like, I'm so excited. And, I've never been to a cottage. This would be like the coolest thing in the world. So he actually took me there, and his dad was there as well. But his dad was in his own little world at that time. And so we end up getting there, and the entire drive there, he was smoking cigarettes in his car, and I was sitting in the back.
And I remember, since I have asthma, being like, can you please stop? And we got into a little argument because he told me I should be grateful that he was even taking me to the cottage. And looking back on it now, like, I could never imagine sending my own child with a man to a cottage, isolated
Yeah.
for even a day. And then we get to the cottage and everything's good. We end up eating dinner and I end up going out on the dock. And he had warned me that there was like a flimsy piece of wood on the dock. Um, so, like, not to step on it because there's a chance that it would break. And I didn't listen. I was like 9 or 10. I was in my own little world. I ran out on the dock and my leg fell through it.
Okay.
And I just remember screaming and crying, and they ended up pulling me up, and my entire like thigh was bruised the next day. I had cuts all over it. And I remember from that moment on, I just wanted to like sleep. I just wanted to relax. Like, I didn't even care about being at the cottage anymore. Like, I just wanted to go home. Um, and then I remember asking to call my mom, and he told me no. And he yelled at me. And then his dad ended up going to bed early,
Hmm.
and we stayed up a little bit later. I remember at this point, I had a DS with me, which is like a little Game Boy system.
Yeah.
And I was playing a game on it and it was getting late. So I was like, okay, I'm going to head to bed. And he told me, oh, I don't want you to get scared. So I can come sleep beside you in the bed. That way, if you wake up, at least you know I'm here. And I remember telling him, like, no, I'm okay. I don't really feel comfortable with that. Um, but he insisted. And at this point, I'd already been yelled at twice by him. So I felt scared and I just let him come into the bed. And I remember holding on to my DS and just pretending to fall asleep, which was something I used to do with Dan whenever he would come and babysit me. I knew what would happen. So it became the
Hmm.
trend of me just pretending to sleep, hoping he would, just do whatever he had to do to me and go away. So I wouldn't have to interact with it. And so I pretended to fall asleep and I was laying there, and very quickly, he had on pajama pants that I guess had like a hole where you could pee from or something like that. Um, and all I felt was something rubbing against my back. So I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm having one of those like anxiety moments of what is happening right now. And I ended up rolling over and opening my eyes, and I saw his penis was out and he was rubbing it against me. And he told me, just go back to sleep and it's okay. And then I pretended to sleep, and he didn't ever insert it or do anything else, but he just kept on rubbing his penis against me. Um, and then eventually he ended up falling asleep.
I always wonder when, I've done some investigations in like our sex assault unit, and just some of the when people talk about like what other people are doing, I just wonder, where do these people come from? And where, like, how, and then how you, like in your situation, how, basically through your whole life to this point, these type of men keep showing up in your life. So it's like, how how does one uh get or attract this type of person constantly? And I just wonder if it's like the situation itself, maybe something that mom was doing at the time. Yeah, it's just some kind of thoughts I've always wondered about, like, where do these people come from that are constantly like this? So
I feel like it definitely was. Everybody knew my mom didn't care. And I don't want to say like she never had love for me or she never, wanted the best for me, because I'm sure at some point she did. But it's one of those things where she surrounded herself with so many problematic people, whether they were alcoholics, drug addicts, and everybody had kind of already known, because my mom went around telling people that I was lying about Dan assaulting me, that she would never believe me. So if my mom would never believe me,
the police will never believe me. Nobody else will ever believe me.
Mm.
And it became this very well-known thing where, everybody in my mom's friend group knew that she was abusive towards me. They sort of knew what was going on, but nobody ever did anything. And I think that just says, a lot about the type of people who was in my mom's life at the time.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it really opened the door once people knew that, right? They see, okay, like I have full access to this kid.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I remember coming home after the cottage, and my mom and I got into like a little argument. I don't even remember what it was. And I remember just yelling at my mom, like, this happened to me. And like, you don't care. Like, I don't feel safe anymore. I don't want Brad around anymore. And I remember her looking at me in my eyes and telling me that Brad looked at me like I was his daughter and he would never do anything like that to me.
Mm.
Um, and then she asked me, if so many things have happened to me in my life, then draw what his penis looks like.
Wow.
So imagine I'm 9, 10 years old. I'm not an artist. I go and I draw it out and I hand it to her. And then she looks at me and she's like, that's not what his penis looks like.
Okay. So you see there's other things going on, or maybe think there's other things going on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, it was basically just my mom ended up, hating me for it. And I remember at this point, like, I didn't even have the words for what was happening to me. Like, I didn't know it was rape or sexual assault. I didn't know these terms. And I actually went to school and we were sitting in an assembly, and one of my best friends at this time, um, I love her and her family, even though we haven't talked in over a decade. She was telling me that her dad would tickle her legs sometimes. And I remember looking at her and being like, oh, does he do this and this afterwards? And she looked at me with like this like weird look in her face. She's like, what do you mean? Does he touch my vagina afterwards? Like, what are you talking about? And she went home, and I guess she actually told her mom that day. And the next day, I had Children Aid Services show up to my school. And my friend, when we were out at recess right before CAS came, she looked at me and she told me, she's like, my mom said you're being raped.
Mm.
And she called Children Aid Services. And I remember looking at her, and I had heard that term before. I didn't know what it exactly meant, but I remember being like, no, I'm not. Like, it just happens to everybody. Like, what are you talking about,
Yeah.
And I was just so convinced at that time that it even though I didn't like it, I thought it was still normalized.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking, is like it's been normalized for you. So yeah, you're trying not to make it some sort of bad thing, I guess.
Exactly.
So from there, what happens once it's Children's Aid?
Children Aid Services.
So they get involved. What was it like working with them at this age? Do you remember much about that?
I remember begging them for help. And at this point, it's hard because you're so young where they can't do anything without talking to your parent. So they came and visited me at school, and then they went to go visit my mom, and my mom freaked out on them, saying that you can't visit my child without my permission first.
Hmm.
And they said, well, technically we can come to the school and visit your child. And my mom basically told them that I was making it up and I was angry at her. And this was around the time when Dan had already been, charges are about to be laid and everything with Dan. So then she just basically started telling CAS that I was lying, that I had done this before, that this is just, maybe I had seen something on TV and I had the tendency to lie. Um, and very quickly, my teacher realized that there was something else going on because she had asked me, why did CAS come? Are you okay? Like, if you want to talk, I'm here. And I remember not trusting my teacher at first. Her name was Miss Buller. And I remember one day I was just so scared to go home. So I finally broke down to her and I told her
CAS doesn't believe me. The police don't believe me. My mom doesn't believe me. All this is happening to me. And I'm scared to go home because when I go home, my mom will hit me. My mom will scream at me. If I do the slightest thing wrong, like let's say I I spill milk or something like that, I'm never going to hear the end of it. I'm going to get a slap upside the back of my head or worse. And I remember my teacher just looking at me with like the most fear I've ever seen in a human being's eyes, honestly. And she called CAS again. And then they came again, and the same situation happened. And then my teacher wouldn't let down. So now I have my papa and my teacher constantly calling children aid services on my mom, being like, something is going on in this house.
Mm.
And then I would say I was around maybe 11 at this point, maybe 10 still, the end of 10. I had a worker come in, and I remember I finally just broke. And I was like, my mom doesn't feed me enough. My clothes are too small for me. Like, look at this. My mom hits me. And I've been told that I've been raped. Like, I want to get out. Like, I remember looking at this worker and telling her, please do not send me back home today. If I go back home, I'm going to get beat. I'm going to get screamed at for CAS being called again. Please, whatever you do not send me home.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and told me that I was too old already, and that if I went into care, I'd end up in group homes and nobody would want to adopt me, and the group home life would be worse.
Jeez. Not really giving you much of a ray of hope in there. Not, you know what, from my own experience, one of the things I was thinking about as you were telling this story here too is with the children's aid stuff, I think that's one of the hardest jobs that are out there. And this is just more from a police perspective, having gone to calls where it's just physical abuse. So maybe parents are beating kids, or there's the sexual abuse. But I've seen it both sides, kind of like where the kid is found to be lying and making up stories, and like severe sexual abuse stories. And then there's obviously the side like we're talking about here where the stuff's real. And it's quite the position to be put in as that middle person who's got to decide, what am I doing with this kid? How do we get them out of this situation? How do we make things better for them? And it's almost like there's never a good answer. I obviously the system, there's a lot of things that need to be fixed in it even to this day. But yeah, it's like it's one of the hardest things to be at. I remember specifically going to someone's house where their daughter was, I think she was like early teens. She was making a lot of allegations against the parents. And we had a documented history of her, like nothing ever being found to be true. So that one was like a confirmed, we knew this was being made up and she was doing it just to like get stuff from her parents. She didn't, they tell her no. And she's just like, I'm going to call and doing that kind of stuff. But then you get the ones where it's real and you're like, I want to help this person. I wish I could take this kid away myself, but there's nowhere to take them. Or there's nobody that can really do much, right? Children's aid, maybe they could hold on to a kid for a week, but they're trying to find family or somebody to pass the kid to. So yeah, it's quite the disastrous situation to be a part of.
And even now, looking back on it, like I look at all the workers and really their hands are tied. If you have a parent saying, oh, all of this is lies, this never happened.
Mhm.
And it's hard because, again, like you said, they're just a middleman. They have no idea what is actually happening behind closed doors unless have video evidence of things. They can't really do much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a difficult world.
But yeah, so then very quickly, I realized nobody was going to help me. But that didn't mean, the calls to CAS stopped. As I grew older, around 11, I started to tell my friends about what was happening a lot more. Because at this point, my mom was just so angry with me. I couldn't even come home and just, let's say, go to my room. It always had to be a screaming match or her threatening me. Like her favorite thing to say is, I'll slap you so hard your head will spin. And then she would hit me.
And it was just really one of those things where I felt like this was everybody's life.
Mhm.
I didn't know that there really was this like loving family situation that could ever happen. And during this point, I didn't have the best way I could say I didn't have a voice against my mom. I would always kind of, fetal position it and just, take whatever my mom had to say to me because I was more scared of her than I was of anything else in the world. And that sort of stopped around 12
Mhm.
when my mom had told me she was pregnant with my sister. And I will never forget that day. I come home from school and I had known her boyfriend at the time, but they had just broken up. They'd only been together about a month and maybe two. And then my mom tells me she's pregnant. And I remember looking at her, and this was the first time in my life where like I felt actual like anger and like protectiveness almost. I remember, my mom would say all these things to her friends that I was a horrible child, that I was impossible to deal with. But this really was the first time that I'd spoken back to my mom.
Mhm.
And when she told me that she was pregnant with my sister, I told her she had to get an abortion and she had no choice. And I remember her yelling at me, telling me that I should be happy that she's having another child and that I'd have a sibling. And I remember looking at her and of course, now I know I shouldn't have said these things, but at the time, I felt like there was no other way. I told my mom that she either had to get an abortion or I would kill her myself because I did not want another child to be born into, being sexually assaulted or being hit or being screamed at or not having enough food to eat or, any of the things I went through.
Mhm.
And I remember being so angry and just screaming at her that she had to get rid of this child. And of course, now I'm so grateful that I have my sister and she's alive and, she's here and well. But it really was one of those things for me where I was like, how could you even think about having another child
Mhm.
after everything I've been through and after the fact that you can't even sit there like I I can remember the amount of times my mom told me that she loved me. And, it all fits on one hand. Like, there was no sense of affection or love or caring or even like she never felt like a mother.
Does your sister know who dad is?
No.
No? Okay.
As soon as my mom found out she was pregnant, she blocked and deleted her boyfriend at the time and never allowed him to
Hmm.
find out that she had a kid.
Oh, really? Wonder, did she ever say why?
So
Like why that is?
she did that with me. She did that with my sister, and then she did that again with my brother. When I was a kid, she told everybody that I was through a sperm donor, which was not the truth. And then when my sister was born, she did the same thing. And now my brother is about like 5, and she says the same thing for him. So my mom had this. I don't know why she would go through it alone because, again, it makes it so much harder being a single parent. But she had this thing of keeping the children from their father.
Okay. So your sister's born, and then this is around 12 years old. You're 12.
Yeah.
And then at 13, you start skipping school. And this is where your friend Ashley comes into the story.
Yeah. So right after my sister was born, I became super attached to my sister, way too attached. It definitely was that trauma bond. And I really was just trying to protect her. Like, I remember getting up in the middle of the night and changing her diapers. I would, walk her every single day after school. I was the first person to ever bring her to the park and
Mm.
put her in a swing. I remember I was the first person to feed her pureed food, and I would go grocery shopping to get her, the best of the best and put it through the baby bullet. I loved my sister more than anything in the world, more than I loved myself. And by the age of 13, she was about to turn 1 or around 1 at this point, and I had skipped or just over 1, and I had skipped school in October, as you know, school starts in September. So it was my first time
Mhm.
in grade 9 skipping school. And I had, I was outside at the smoker's pit at the time right before I skipped. And a girl walked up to our group. And at first, I didn't recognize her. So she's just talking to my friends. And then I look at her and I'm like, Ashley. And her and I had a history. Like we had gone back to from when I was like, I would say 8 or 9. We were best friends, like to the point where I remember trying to convince her mom that I was her long lost daughter and to take me in.
Mhm.
And Ashley and I like hugged it out, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to see you. Like, hey, would you like to come with me? I'm heading over to like my friend's house right now. We can go smoke bongs." And at this time, I was very new into smoking weed. But I was just so excited to see her. And I was like, you know what? What's the worst that could happen? She was about a year older than me. So after I skipped school, I ended up, going to my very last class after that because I only skipped like a period or two. And then I come back home, and I guess the school had called my mom to let her know that I'd skipped a period. And
Mhm.
at the same time, it was one of those perfect disasters where I walk in and my sister used to wait for me at the window every single day when I was coming home from school. She would stand there and she would just wait. And she ended up saying mama, which was, her first time saying that
To you.
in general.
Sorry, she said mom to you.
Yeah, she said it to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And then my mom lost it on me and basically told me that I was training her into calling me mama, which was not the case at all.
Mm.
And I felt like that should have been, hey, she's saying her first words. We should be happy. But no, my mom starts screaming at me and calling me a degenerate, saying that, I'm out there doing drugs and I'm skipping school. And so during this time, my mom's telling me that she doesn't want me at the house anymore to get out. And my mom has already kicked me out a few times at this point. So it wasn't something that was like a shock to me. And to make it even worse, I had something I called my go bag in the back of my closet. So anytime my mom would kick me out, I had extra pair of pants in there, a sweater, socks,
Mm.
and like little like snacks, like whether it's like a Rice Krispie treat or something like that that won't go bad.
It's crazy to think that somebody at your age at that time would have that prepared for those reasons.
It was happening so much that it just kind of
Mhm.
became the thing where I was like, I can't keep on going outside in the middle of the cold or
Yeah.
in the boiling heat and not having anything else. So I remember as my mom screaming at me to get out, I remember being like, okay, fine, I'll leave. Cool. But I'm going and grabbing my stuff first. So at this point, we were in the living room and I started trying to walk through to my bedroom. And my mom tried to block the way, saying, no, I wasn't allowed to grab anything. So I tried to push past her. And as soon as I did, my mom started losing it, saying, you want to put hands on me? And which I didn't. I just, kind of shouldered past her.
Mhm.
And then my mom literally grabbed me by the neck and slammed me against the wall as hard as she could. Unfortunately, at that time, one of her friends was in the house, and he just sat there and did nothing.
Mm.
And he was so in love with my mom, she would drain him dry of all of his money, and he would stand up for her no matter what she did. So she ended up kicking me out, and I wasn't even able to grab my go bag. So I left and I ran to, this was in Ajax at the time. So I ran to the Ajax Community Center because I knew that's where a bunch of my friends hung out after school. And I remember getting there and I had ran the entire way and it was a good like 15-minute walk, maybe.
Mhm.
So when I get there, I see one of my friends and instantly they're like, what is wrong? What's going on? And I didn't realize at the time until my friend pointed it out. But my entire like neck had like basically like a ring around it where it was just red. And it ended up bruising slightly afterwards. just because of how hard my mom had grabbed me. And basically, from that moment on, I was sleeping in parks. And one of my friends found out that I was sleeping in a park, and, God bless her and her family. Her name was Jamie, and her mom took me in right away. And so I was couch surfing basically at that point, and I was there for at least a week.
Okay.
And her mom tried to talk to CAS about taking me in, and they just didn't have the means at the time. But I remember being at her house, and this was my first time being able to allow my emotions kind of to take over. And I got so depressed that, like, I remember my friend coming in from school and hand feeding me food because I just couldn't move. Like, I couldn't get out of bed. Her mom would come
Mm.
in and have to remind me to go to the bathroom because I would just sit there on their bed, like, not with no energy, no, fight
Yeah.
anymore. I had given in completely. I just wanted my life to end.
And at this time, so you said you were smoking weed. Did you have any addictions at this point, or were you trying anything else?
So I had started smoking weed because after my mom was unable to allow Dan to watch me because he went to jail, the two girls who got assaulted by him, she had them babysit,
Oh, okay.
and they had addiction issues.
Okay.
And she didn't care. Like, she knew that they were doing drugs around me. It wasn't even just weed. Like, I was watching them do coke and Molly, and then they would have drug dealers come in while they were babysitting me and just hang out and smoke. And I was around, I would say 11 or 12 when I tried weed for the first time. And they thought it was funny to give me weed. So they handed me a bong and told me to smoke it. And it's okay. It
Mm.
would make me cool. And I remember just like coughing up a lung and feeling like I was going to pass out. So I'd only smoked weed a handful of times at this point.
Okay.
And the few times I did, it was with one of my friends or it was with the babysitters. So I didn't have an addiction at this point, but I definitely very quickly it came into an addiction as soon as my mom kicked me out. And
Yeah.
as soon as, Children Aid Services got involved again, they put me into something called a mixed modality house. So it's a group home setting with live-in foster parents. So, like, we have the group home staff and everything. And I remember being there and just being absolutely terrified. I didn't exactly understand, you know, what this meant for me or what was going to happen next. But I remember just being scared of being there. And there was a little girl who was in the group home with me. She was about 8. And I remember she had a freak out. And I remember just watching, the live-in foster parents, how they reacted. And at this time, of course, now I realize she had like actual, issues and she would hit and stuff like that. But I didn't know that it was my first day in. So watching, how they handled that situation terrified me.
Mm.
So I ran away from there and I went straight back into sleeping on the park benches and, in and out of that group home. I would run away, they'd send me back. And it was kind of just like that for, I think it was very short. It was probably like a month or so. And then the next little bit is a blur. I started kind of bouncing around. And I really didn't feel safe staying in the group homes that I was in, and they started changing my group home. So I remember at one point I was out in a group home in Whitby, and one of the kids that I was living with at the time, he had sexually assaulted multiple young girls and he had just got out of juvie. And I remember like he was bragging about it to one of the other group home kids. And I remember just being like, this is not the place for me.
Yeah.
So around this point, I was about to turn 14 and I ended up running away from a group home again. And my mom basically got a call from CAS saying that there were no more group homes available for me. And I had came back into basically Children Aid Services custody, and they had asked if I could stay there for a night, and it was right before my first 14th birthday. It was literally like a night before. So my mom let me in for the night and she told me I could go out until 10 with my friends. I came back at like 10:05, and my mom had locked the door. And
Mm.
I was with my friend at the time. So I was knocking on the door, and my mom basically told me, "No, I'm not letting you in." So I went around to the back to see if my window was open. It wasn't. And my mom ended up calling the police on me. So at this point, I didn't know my mom had called the police on me for trying to break in, but I had walked over to the bus stop, and my friend told me that I could stay at her house with her mom. And basically, we're waiting at the bus stop, and we got surrounded by police officers. And I remember hearing barking coming from one of the cars and being so scared because I was just like, is there a canine unit here? What is happening?
Mhm.
Like in my head, I'm like, I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to get in so much trouble. Like, this is end all be all. I'm going to jail for the rest of my life. I've never been surrounded by police officers before. So I was absolutely terrified. And they basically explained to me what happened. And I don't remember where I ended up that night. I might have ended up with my mom or going to my friend's house. But basically, right after that night, I ended up in another group home and I ran away. And I ended up running into one of my mom's old friends. His name was Brett. And I remember him giving me Oxycontin, telling me that I could sell it. And, if I was able to sell it, then I'd be able to afford things. So I wouldn't have to keep on running away and living on the street. I'd be able to eventually get my own place, which, mind you, I just turned 14. So I don't understand how I could have got to my own place.
Mhm.
And instead of, just selling it like he told me to, I ended up starting to use it. And it became a thing where, he would give me a bunch and basically tell me that I could pay him back after I sell it all. And I would just use it all until him I got robbed and I would need more.
Jeez. Well, and at this time, you have with the 20-year-old boyfriend, and then more drugs kinda come into play?
So this was right before. I ended up
Okay.
moving into one of my other friends' houses. Her mom was willing to take me in, and her and her mom fought a lot. I'm so grateful for them for taking me in, but her mom really was not in the place. And hearing them fight, I became very protective of my friend and started telling her mom, like, you cannot talk to your daughter this way.
Mm.
So very quickly, it became toxic for me as well. And then I ran away and I dyed my hair blue. And basically, the woman who took me in called me ungrateful. And the police, I was in McDonald's at this point, and the police walked right by me, and I knew they came in looking for me. But since I dyed my hair blue, they didn't recognize me. So I thought I was good. And then my friend's mom walks in and she sees me, and I just make a run for it. And she chases me, she tackles me to the ground. She basically puts my arms behind my back like she's arresting me and waits for the police to come take me. The police put me in handcuffs, put me in the back of their car. And I remember just like screaming at her and being like, "You hurt me. Why would you do this?" And then the police gave me the heartbreaking news that I was going to be moving far away,
Mm.
out to a small town by London, Ontario called St. Mary's. And they told me that it would be a foster home. And I remember just being like, I am not moving all the way to like this random town that I have no idea. I have no, like, I've never met anybody there. I'm not being isolated like that. But of course, I'm in handcuffs in the back of a cop car. I don't really have the choice.
Yeah.
Um, so they bring me out there, and within, the first 24 hours, I tried to run away. And now, again, it was a very, very, very small town to the point they didn't even have their own police force. They just had OPP who would come in. So, me trying to run away, the only way out was the Via Rail train that came in like 2 times a day. So, as I'm walking, trying to find where the station is, a police officer sees me in my bright blue hair and takes me straight back to the foster home because I'm the only person in town with bright blue hair.
Mhm.
And then I started school, and very quickly I started dating out there. And I ended up meeting this one guy. His name was Dylan. And I thought I fell for him. I thought he was the sweetest person. And on top of that, at this point in my life, I had a thing for bad guys, to say the least.
Mm.
I liked the thrill of it. And honestly, it was kind of that comfort in the chaos that I've always known. So he was in and out of jail. He was 20 years old at this point, and I was only 14. And I remember, meeting him. And the first day we met, he pulled out cocaine and Molly. And I remember lying to him and saying, "Oh, I've done coke and Molly before, trying to fit in."
Mhm.
And I ended up doing it. And within the next, I would say 3 weeks, I was doing it more than anything. Like I was doing so much coke and Molly that I barely slept. Um,
So you were instantly hooked on this stuff.
Instantly.
Yeah.
And it gave me that sort of like euphoric feeling where I felt, I guess I could say, it was the first time I felt happiness in my life. And then I remember coming back from my foster home and going to his house one day, and I walk into his garage, and this was probably just after a month of us seeing each other. And he was sitting there with his friends, and they all like jumped when I opened the door. And I looked at them. I'm like, "What are you guys doing? Like, why do you guys look so suspicious?" And I remember his friend being like, "Oh, we're not doing anything, blah, blah." And then my boyfriend Dylan looks at me and looks at his friend and he's like, "Nah, it's okay. She's cool." And goes, and they have a piece of glass on a fork. So they had bent like the tongs of a fork to fit the piece of glass in, and they were burning it and inhaling it through like a straw. And he looked at me and he's like,
Mm.
this is a different way to do Molly. And I didn't know at the time that it was meth,
Okay.
but I had smoked it and I thought it was a new way to do Molly and it would be a better high. And I was up for, I think, 3 days,
Wow.
after I had smoked it for the first time. And I remember sitting there and I was trying to make a candle or something like that. And I was trying to like burn glass to melt it. And obviously, I was too high to understand what I was doing. But the glass ended up bursting and exploded and like burnt my finger and had cut it open. And I remember he got so mad at me because, I'd got blood all over his garage.
Mhm.
And he had hit me. And I remember, I had been in a lot of relationships at this point, and they were all toxic, but I'd never actually been, hit by my boyfriend. So I was taken aback. And I remember just like crying and sitting there and being too high to even comprehend what was going on. So I went back home to my foster home at this time. And I remember coming home and I had only lived there, I would say, like I said, this was about a month in to me being there, maybe just a little bit over. And I came in and I was high as a kite. And my foster mom looked at me and she's like, "We need to have a serious conversation." And she told me that she wanted to adopt me and she wanted me to be a part of her family. And that, even though I'm never there, she would like if I started to come home more for dinner time and if I could spend more time with them because she really wants to help me. And I remember just like crying in front of her and being like, "I am so sorry for never being home. I'm so sorry for always being out and just, the attitude I've given you. Like, I never thought anybody could ever want me as a part of their family."
This is your first real opportunity, any kind of hope,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
And I had believed her 100% when she said that because she already had 2 daughters that she had adopted. So I thought, wow, this woman is going to adopt me. And I remember just feeling so guilty for even doing drugs or, there were times where, like I said, I tried to run away or I gave her attitude or fought her because she was like, I asked to sleep out at a friend's house and she would tell me no and I would scream at her and she'd finally give in. And at this point, I remember just like I said, I was so hurt for how I had treated her. And so the next day I went to school and everything was normal. And then within a couple days, I had started to come home for like dinner. I started to really try and make that effort to be a normal human being and be a part of her family. And then one day I remember saying, okay, I'm going to go out with my friends for a bit and then I'll come back. And she told me, can you just stay for a little bit longer? Children Aid Services is coming. They just want to do a meeting. And basically, what I thought you have to do a meeting, I think it was every 30 or 60 days. It's called like a care plan just to check in, see how
Mhm.
everything's doing. And I was willing to, meet with them, which was the first time in my life that I was actually, since I had been in care with them, willing to meet with them. And then they had showed up, and very quickly I realized that it was not a normal meeting. They came with 2 workers, and my my foster mom had lied to them saying that I was being pimped out by my boyfriend, which at this time I was not at all. It was just the fact that he was older and he had a car,
Oh, okay.
and she didn't even know that I was on drugs. But she had said that I was on coke, which was true, but she didn't actually have proof of this. And I remember just like the workers explaining to me everything she had told them and that they were going to have to take me back to a group home in Whitby, which was the one I mentioned earlier that, I lived there with a kid who had just gotten out of jail, well, juvie for
Mhm.
sexually assaulting other kids. And I remember she brought up an incident to the workers that I had apparently dropped a baby on its head. So the story was she also babysat. And one day I was home because she had asked me to be home more. And her oldest daughter was there and was sitting on the couch with the baby. I got up to go to my room or to the bathroom or something. And I guess the daughter wasn't watching the baby properly, and the baby fell off the couch and landed on a toy
Oh,
and got a bump on the head. And instead of the daughter being honest about what happened, she blamed me.
okay.
And at this point, I didn't even know that that was the situation. I didn't even know that the daughter had said this to the mom. The mom never brought it up to me until the workers were here.
So yeah, there's a bunch of things going on, and she's just connecting dots where there's no connections, and
Yeah.
basically it's going to fall on you at this point.
And I remember when she had brought up the drugs, I openly admitted to it. I was like, yes, I'm doing drugs. But I need help. I don't know what to do. And I remember when she's like, yeah, well, you dropped a baby on its head. I remember just like falling, being like, what are you talking about?
Hmm.
Like, I will own up to the things that I'm doing, which, she had no proof of. So 100%, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. But this, no way. And I tried to run away, which didn't work. One of the workers just grabbed me by the arm and then put me in the back of the car. And I was off back to Whippy.
Okay. So at this time too, you're 14. Ashley comes back into the story for you.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what was the gap in there. Was she still around in your life? Because she kind of plays a prominent role in this next part. But where was she this whole time?
So we didn't talk at all. Basically, after my mom kicked me out, I hung around her for about a month or two. And then a situation happened where basically I was over at her house one night. It was her boyfriend's house, and her boyfriend's friend tried to force me to have sex with him. And then she basically told me, "Oh, he's like that. Just, move on from it," basically.
Okay.
So I stopped hanging out with her because he was always around.
Okay.
And then after I moved back to Whitby, I had run away from the group home a bunch of times. So then they started putting me in different group homes. And then I ended up in another mixed modality, which is again a group home setting, but with live in foster parents. And at this point, it was just before, the holiday time, and they had given me a phone. And this phone, I was able to go and message people, and, I downloaded Facebook and Instagram. And I don't remember how Ashley and I got connected again, but she basically reached out to me, and I guess we were just talking normally. And then within a couple days, she told me that her boyfriend and her were throwing, well, the exact word she used was, "My hot boyfriend and I are throwing a party, and we want you to come down and, party with us. You can run away from your group home.
Hmm.
We'll pick you up in a car. We'll drive you out to, my boyfriend's house. And then we'll drive you back home tomorrow if you want to go home."
So was she somebody that you would say you trusted at this point? Just with sporadic contact and some things going on?
I always looked at her like she really was like my sister. We had, and
Okay.
I know this is like so small, but we had little moles on our body that were like in the same spot on our back.
Mm.
And like she taught me how to shave.
Mhm.
When I was a kid, she taught me, you know, about periods because my mom never taught me how to use a tampon. And she was the one who, walked me through how to use a tampon and things like that. So she really was like that older sister sort of vibe for me.
Yeah. She's fulfilling like a whole bunch of different roles in your life.
Yeah.
So, like, obviously, things you're not getting at home. So, this here is where she messages you to come to this party with her boyfriend, and he ends up, I guess, this is where things kind of take another turn in your life.
Yeah. So basically, they told me to run away. So I do end up running away from my group home. They pick me up directly outside of the house. And it was at nighttime after everybody was in bed. And I remember, as I said before, like I dated older guys and a bunch of my friends have dated older guys. But as soon as I got in the car, I looked at her, as she called him, her hot boyfriend. And instantly I realized this man has to be in his 40s at least. And I remember just like that sort of panic, but also that sense of it can't be that bad. I mean, I date older guys, all my friends date older guys, even though he's older. I mean, it's not the end of the world. So
Mhm.
we end up driving. And at this point, the group home I was living in was in Ajax, and he lived in Ajax as well. So they end up just driving to his house. And I remember getting to his house and just being in like absolute awe. This was the most beautiful house I'd ever seen in my life.
Oh, really? Okay.
And they had so much land. I remember just being shocked. They had like a volleyball net in the backyard. They had like little ATVs they could go ride around the trails in. They had like when I walked into his house, he did like the full tour for me. And I've ever since I was a little kid, I've always had an obsession with old cars.
Mhm.
And I've always wanted to learn how to take them apart and rebuild them. And like, so he brought me into the garage, and the garage was humongous. And he had a bunch of old cars in there that he was working on. And I remember just being like, wow, this is why she's dating him. Like, this is so cool. We walked through the house, and in his living room, there was like a stripper pole.
Jeez. Not a usual thing you see in
Yeah.
home. Yeah.
And she told me, she was like, yeah, it's a spinning stripper pole and it has like lights around it. And she told me that whenever she gets bored, she just comes down and dances for him. And I remember like he had a flat screen TV in his room, which was crazy because I had never even seen a flat screen TV like that. And he had like the most beautiful kitchen, and like everything in the house was so like outside of anything I'd ever seen in my life.
For me, not knowing this part of the story, I was expecting you to say that you were taken to like a speeder house. So, like it's run down to some shack. And I think that's what people would assume. But now you're taken to a nice place. So I think it speaks to the fact that there are people involved in this stuff, in sex trafficking, human trafficking, and it spans, all socioeconomic groups. It doesn't matter your income. It doesn't matter what you do for a job, because now you're involved in this different setting that is so outside anything you've been involved in to this point. So yeah, I was not expecting that part.
And I remember like even just coming into, his property, you had to drive up to his driveway. Like there was trees that would just go down the pathway that you'd be driving up onto his driveway. And it was just, like I said, I guess it knocked down all of my walls at that point because I was just like amazed at how beautiful everything was. And when I got there, he was so nice. There was another girl there, and then there was another guy there as well. And I remember just like, sitting around. I don't remember much of that night, but I do remember arriving and starting to drink. And I remember being past Molly. So I started doing some Molly that night. And I guess the night went on. And like I said, I don't remember much of what happened that night. But the next morning when I woke up, I I remember just like, sitting up in the room and kind of just coming back to myself because I was so out of it from how much I partied the night before. And my friend Ashley walks in and she basically tells me that I have to pay for everything I used. And I remember looking at her being like, "What are you talking about? Like, you invited me to party. Like, I have no money. What do you mean I have to pay for, the drugs, the alcohol I used?" And then she gave me the rundown of I owed $100 for the room because I slept in it for the night. I owed the money for the drugs I used, the money for the alcohol I drank. I owed them gas money for driving me here, and I owe them gas money for when they were going to drive me back. And I remember just that moment of like, okay, but like, what do you expect from me here? Because I don't have a dollar in my pocket. So, like, what is this? You want me to go rob somebody? Like, what is happening here? Like, I just don't understand.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she basically just told me that she works. And she's like, and at this point, Backpage was still a thing, which is
Mm.
a website where, sex workers would go and post or traffickers would go and post girls. And basically, Johns, which is the guys who go and use the services, would go and find girls off of that.
Okay.
She basically gave me the rundown of the fact that she goes and she charges basically $100 to $150 an hour, depending on what services they want. And that I would only have to sleep with a few people and I would get all the money back that I owe them. And then they would even give me a cut if I make some more of it. And I remember at this point, I already had such a trauma with sex that a lot of times, in the relationships I was in, my boyfriends would have to force me to have sex with them because I'd be like, "No, I don't want to," or "I'm scared," just because I was so used to, it being something that hurts and
Yeah.
not something that I would enjoy. So I remember looking at her and just like in that moment feeling like, "Ooh, pardon my language, but what the hell is happening here?" And telling her, "No way in hell am I going to go and have sex with random men to make this money." Like, and at this time, I already had my own judgment on sex workers. So I was like, that is disgusting. I would never do that. I'm not low like that. And because I started freaking out, Jamie basically came into the room as well and had told me that they were going to lock me in the room until I was able to calm down and talk to them like a normal person.
Jamie is Ashley's
Boyfriend.
the older guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then I go and basically, I sit in the room and they locked the door. I remember trying to open it. It wasn't opening. I remember knocking on the door, asking them to let me out. They didn't let me out. And I remember just sitting there and crying in the corner and just waiting for, them to finally come and talk to me. And at this point, I didn't even think of it, but I had no idea where my phone was.
Mm.
So I'm just sitting there in the room crying. Eventually, they end up, coming back, and I was willing to talk to them calmly. And they basically told me that they had taken my phone and that I was not going to be leaving until I paid them back. And at this point, I was so scared because not only was Ashley there and basically, agreeing with them, saying, yeah, you owe us money. But then there was Jamie and then the other girl who was there and the other guy. Everybody was just watching me. And I remember being like, I have no fight. Like I don't know what to do. There is no right answer.
Do they threaten you or your family or anybody with violence, or is there any aspect of that, or is it all just kind of they're just telling you you owe money and you are kind of forcibly being confined to this house?
So at first there was no abuse. Like the very first day, it was just screaming and locking me in the room until I was able to be calm. But very quickly, I would say by the second day, there was, Jamie had hit me for the first time.
Mm.
And basically, the first official day of me being there, and they tell me that they need to take photos of me. And so they start having me stand in like the doorway. They're fixing, they're turning on and off lights, asking me to pose in specific ways. Ashley, I remember her going on the bed. And remember, she's only like a little bit older than a year older than me. So she's posing in her lingerie on the bed, telling me how to pose, how I need to angle myself. And she's taking the photos, and everything is neck down, except for the one in the doorway where they had basically my entire back of my head and down.
Mm.
And I remember them walking me through what my first call would be. And I was so terrified. I remember being like, no, I hurt, like I can't do this right now. I remember trying to go back into the room to go sleep and then being like, no, you've got to call, you know, we posted your ad.
What did they say it would be like? Well, how are they describing it to you?
So they basically told me that it would be based off of the John. So the first call was somebody who just wanted the regular girlfriend experience. So that would mean I would have to kiss him. I also had to make sure that he put the condom on and that they would basically be in the room next door to my room. And I would go downstairs, I'd walk him up to my room. They had candles in the room, and that I would have to have sex with him and I'd have to suck him off if that's what he wanted. And I remember Ashley walking me through being like, listen, if you start to get tired during it, go up beside his ear and start moaning because that will make him come faster. And I remember her telling me specifically things like, oh, if you touch his balls in this way while moaning, it will help him come faster.
Mm,
So that way
okay.
you won't have to do it for as long. And I remember just being like, in that moment, I have no idea, like what to expect. And I remember the first guy coming in, and we went up to the room and I did the girlfriend experience. He gave me the money. And I remember thinking, okay, like I can't owe more than, two people coming in. And then I handed them the $100 after he left. And I remember asking them, okay, so like I only have to do one more and I can leave, right? And they're like, no, well, now you also owe us for the room for today. Now you also owe us for the vanilla gift cards they had to buy to use on Backpage.
Oh yeah.
So then it became this cycle of, anytime that I would feel like I'm making money, I would just owe them more money.
Were you free to roam around in the house? Like, I'm wondering, is there any point, like, do they have someone that actually is physically going to keep you there? Or if you try to leave, they're going to grab you and and pull you back?
So after the first day, after my first, I only got like maybe 2 calls that night because, I had been locked in the room for so long and the whole setup took longer than it should have for them. So right after that day, I remember I passed out in the bed and I was just so exhausted. And I remember just like the smell of like sweat on the sheets. And the next morning when I woke up, I thought I had woken up before everybody else. I was wrong. And basically, the way the rooms were laid out was we were upstairs. My room was on, I believe it was like the left hand side. They had the other guy's room and the girl's room on the right hand side. And then Jamie's room was like in the middle,
Mhm.
on the back wall. So I remember trying to like get out of the room and I went to go to walk down the stairs. And I remember I got to the front door and I didn't even have like socks on or shoes on at this point. And I remember just trying to make a run for it. So I open up the front door and standing outside is Jamie and his guy friend. And they were just smoking a cigarette.
Oh,
And in that moment, I was like, I have a choice. Either I start screaming and running or I go back inside and I never know if I'm going to make it out.
mhm.
So I started screaming at the top of my lungs and I ran. And obviously, I'm running on like gravel and like, on the pavement or whatever. And it's hurting and I'm not able to run that fast. I'm exhausted. And Jamie caught up with me very fast. And they brought me back inside. And I remember this was the first time he hit me. And he basically, told me that if I ever tried to run again, he would kill me. And he went into his room and he came back with a gun and he showed me the gun and he told me that, these aren't childish games, that I'm not just going to be able to run away. And even if I did, they will always find me. And until I paid back the money that I owed them, I had no choice.
And you're in a rural setting, it sounds like. So it's not like there's neighbors really to hear you screaming or anything.
So the neighbors are far enough, like the houses were far enough apart where
Okay.
it's like nobody would have heard me. And it's like basically you drive down like a secluded road. And all the houses have like a laneway to drive up to even get to it.
Yeah.
So it really was, secluded and it felt like I was honestly, I remember getting out and saying it felt like I was just trapped on an island with nowhere to go.
Hmm.
And then like I said, they had taken my phone. They took my SIM card out, but they did end up making me post photos a few times. I remember once on Facebook and a couple times on Instagram. And I remember during that time when I had my phone in my hands, I had Ashley sitting beside me watching me post them. And I remember trying to go into my messages on Instagram and message one of my friends, and she took my phone and she told me if I ever tried that again, then Jamie would have to kill me.
So they kept a real watchful eye, and everybody in the house obviously is part of this whole ring of things.
Yeah. So looking
Mm.
back on it now, you know, obviously Ashley was underage. I think back to it and honestly, she could have just been trapped in there as well. And it could have been a thing where it's a never ending cycle. And Jamie had multiple houses where he had girls being run out of. So this wasn't his only house, but this was the house that he actually lived in. So during that time, no matter how much I worked, I would owe more money. And there would be times where, I would wake up early in the morning and he would give me cocaine or Molly or, whatever pills he would give me just to kind of keep me going and be able to endure longer.
Yeah.
And during that time, there would be days where, I would sleep with more than 10 people in a day. And by the end of the day, my vagina would be so swollen and my legs would be so weak that, I'd be laying in the bed and sometimes I'd even be bleeding just because, these guys would just use me like I was a
Hmm.
toy. There was no sense of humanity when people would look at me. And then There was a few times during that time that I was there that Jamie had something he called his VIP nights, where it would be his friends that would come. And then he would have some girls from the other house come and they would dress up. And I remember mine and Ashley's job that night on those nights were the bartender. But even as a bartender, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If one of his friends wants to go and take you up to a room and sleep with you, they have free range to do so.
When you're talking about this sounds like the P Diddy parties now they're getting. It's all over the news. Like it's the same kind of situation, right?
So it is and it isn't.
Hmm.
For a lot of it, like I feel like, of course, I don't know if anybody knew actually what was happening, but I feel like they had to have.
Mhm.
For instance, Ashley and I looked extremely young. And there was another girl who was there at the time during the party. She would come from one of the other houses, and I remember her name. Her name was Jordan, and she was a year older than Ashley. So she was 17. And we all looked extremely underage. So in my eyes, looking back at it now, like you can tell when somebody's a child versus when somebody's adult. And so, yeah, during those nights, we would basically go and sleep with whoever. And during those times, there'd be times I'd have to have a threesome or a foursome with Ashley or Jordan. And I remember on my very first VIP night, there was a police officer who was there. And at first, I didn't know he was a police officer. Obviously, he didn't come in uniform and he wasn't telling everybody he was a police officer, but he wanted to have a threesome with Ashley and I. So we went upstairs, and I was at this point so beyond exhausted because not only did I just have to sleep with my clients, I also had to sleep with Jamie. And before the parties would happen, Jamie would want to sleep with us to make sure he was the first person to touch us.
So if I could just jump into, I wanted to ask about this. So yeah, I saw this part about the police officer in the story. I'm wondering, how do you know they were actually a police officer? Like, did they just say they were, or like, was there some way to verify that this was happening?
So when we went upstairs and before we ended up getting into the sex part, Ashley wanted to smoke a bong. So we were smoking bongs quickly and we were just talking. And, Jamie had this thing of make everybody feel like they're your best friend.
Yeah.
So I started asking him about his life and he was very reluctant. And I remember asking him, hey, why don't you come smoke a bong with us? Hoping it could delay it longer and maybe, he gets too tired to do something. And he looked at me and he's like, I can't smoke. And I was like, why? Do you just not like bongs? Like, do you want us to roll you a spliff or something? And he's like, no, I'm a police officer and we get drug tested. And at this time, it was
Mm.
illegal to do weed.
Yeah. Okay.
This was before the law got passed. So I remember looking at him and being like, in that moment, I remember that fight in my head of should I tell him I'm underage? Should I just expose it right now? Because if he's a police officer, isn't it his duty to protect us? But then
Yeah.
I remember thinking to myself, well, if it was his duty to protect us, he wouldn't be here right now.
Yeah. I was thinking, yeah, it's his duty not to be there in the first place, at least not in that capacity.
Yeah.
Oh,
So then basically, we smoke a couple bongs, Ashley and I, and then he starts, asking us to kiss each other. So then we move into, the sexual part. And I remember just like during that time, this was the very first time during sex where I had like asked the person to stop. He ended up fingering me so hard that I started bleeding. And it's not like I got my period or anything. Like I was actually just bleeding because he had cut up my inside from his fingernails.
yeah.
And I remember like pushing him away and trying to push his hands out of me, being like, can you please stop? This hurts. And Ashley looked at me and she's like, come on, you can handle it. You've done worse things than this.
She's right involved in this. Like that's like the ultimate betrayal out of everybody in your life. She seems like the one who would maybe you had some trust in, and then she's really forcing you into this lifestyle or work or whatever you want to call it.
Thinking back to it, like, I really do want to play the scenario in my head that she was just trapped in it as well, and I was the only person she knew that was vulnerable enough.
Hmm.
And not only just vulnerable enough, like, imagine I had already run away so many times at this point from my group homes. So, Children Aid Services never put out Amber Alerts for me. So, I could be gone for a year and they would never put out an Amber Alert for me. They just viewed me as a runaway, troubled child.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
I like to hope that Ashley wasn't just some mastermind and chose to do all this. I really hope that it was one of those situations of she was trapped and she felt alone and she knew I was the only person that would be able to be there because nobody would miss me.
Yeah.
So then, yeah, end up having sex with the police officer and the party ends up, ending. And during that time, I um I started to almost envy Ashley because she was able to do out calls. She was able to go outside with them and go shopping. Like she would come back and buy new lingerie for me and her. She would be able to go out and she would go to the drug dealer's house with Jamie to go pick up weed or Molly or whatever. She really did have like freedom of range, and I wasn't even allowed in the backyard at this point.
Do you want to explain, just so listeners know, like what exactly an out call is, how that works?
So an out call is it's the exact same thing as, like I said, being posted on back page, where the guys are called Johns will go on message. And instead of them coming to you, you'll end up going to either their house or a hotel. And during that time, Jamie would sit outside in the car and wait for Ashley to finish her job and then come back to him.
Hmm.
So it really was like that sense of, if I can get to an out call, I can escape. And during this time, I, it's not that I had any fight left in me. I was in a battle with myself of two different things of feeling like I want to die, I have no reason left to live. And then two, thinking about if I allow myself to basically just deteriorate and I don't fight and I just allow this to be my life,
Hmm.
I will never know what will happen to my sister.
So that was one of your only motivating forces or factors, making sure that you could kind of see her.
Honestly, looking back at it, I think she's the only thing that kept me alive through my teenage years. Just thinking about the fact that maybe one day she'll have nobody to turn to was my biggest fear in the world. I mean, it still is to this day. And I didn't really touch on this before, but I had a habit of cutting myself before I ended up, being kidnapped. And so during this time of, right before I started to try and copy what Ashley was doing for Jamie, again, like I said, I was just so exhausted. And there'd be times where I'd have to sleep with more than 10 people a day. And there'd be times where, if they pay more, they would get the option to do more things to me.
Mm.
So I started cutting myself in hopes that it would give me a break. And, because in my mind at the time, I'm like, well, they can't go and post me and have guys coming up if I'm bleeding everywhere and I have cuts all over my legs, which unfortunately was wrong. I ended up having, I'm not sure if he was a friend of Jamie's or how this even came into play, but I was told that I had a guy who was coming who was going to pay a lot more because he wanted to do kinkier things with me. And from what I was
Mhm.
told, he was going to pay $500 for the hour. And when he arrived, the first thing he did was told me to take off my clothes, and then he started rubbing his hands up and down my cuts. And he started to tell me how much he loved it and how hot he thought it was. And I remember just being like in this sort of, it felt unreal to me, because in my mind, I thought me cutting myself would make myself damaged goods.
Yeah.
And then it became a thing where it made me unique.
Yeah. Like you have no escape. There's nothing you can do to get you out of this situation.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And then he started to tell me about how much he loved the fact that I was able, and he used the word to mutilate myself. And he thought it was so fascinating that somebody can sit there and cut themselves open like that. And I remember, like I had said, I had started cutting myself. So I had like fresh wounds on me. And he started to dig his finger into like my cut while he was touching himself.
Hmm.
And it reopened my cut. And like when I say cuts, like it's not like it was a superficial little slice, like I would go pretty deep. And so I ended up, he was touching himself. He ended up jacking off and ended up coming. And then he left and he started coming almost on a daily basis. And very quickly, it moved from him just playing with, my scabs to him asking me to cut myself in front of him.
Okay.
And then he had the thing of wanting to dig his finger into it and basically just like play with my cut and my blood. And then during this time is when I started to realize there is no escape. The only thing I can do is to hopefully, in the best terms, kiss up to Jamie as much as I can to get an out call and hopefully get myself out. And during that time, there was a movie I watched when I was a very young child, which I definitely should not have watched. And I don't remember the name of it, but I remember a girl being kidnapped and faking Stockholm syndrome.
Okay.
And like in the movie, they dive into like it was like a psychology thriller or whatever. And I remember just like starting to watch what Ashley was doing for Jamie. And instead of fighting, sleeping with him now, instead of back talking or, doing anything to try and just get out of work, I started to pretend that I loved it. I started to pretend that I wanted to work. I would get excited and I'd be like, how many calls do I have today? How many people commented on my sent us not emails, texted us. And I would do things like I would start massaging Jamie and I would go and I'd start cooking for him. I would start doing his laundry. I remember going up to him and being like, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much for allowing me to take a break right now. Like I'm so lucky to have you."
Hmm.
And then I remember playing this, I don't want to say like tit for tat thing, but I started being like, "Oh, I can sleep with you better than Ashley can." And really started to play this narrative of like I was pretending to be jealous of Ashley and his relationship and saying that I actually felt like I was falling for him and I was just blinded in the beginning, which was, it took everything out of me, honestly.
Yeah, I don't imagine it's easy to switch modes, especially with all the things that have gone on already, right? You think a certain way about this person now. Now you got to put on an act, and but it's for survival.
And I remember just after the first day of me pretending to be in love with him, I that was the very first day where I did less calls than I ever had to. But that's because, I was sleeping with him and I was massaging him and I was doing things for him.
How long had you been at the house at this point?
So my memory is very skewed of how long I was actually there for. At this point, I believe I was there for around a month.
Okay.
So I was only there for around 2 to 3 months, maybe. Again, I was on so many drugs, it was really hard to keep track of time.
Yeah.
And then, so I started, after, my very first day of pretending to be in love with him, I remember going into my room and just bawling my eyes out and feeling so disgusted and just like, is this even going to work? This is a waste of time. Like, I might as well just kill myself now. There's really no hope. And I really didn't think that I would have the energy or even like be able to keep the mask on for long enough. Because I had a lot of mental health issues at this point already, as you could imagine.
Hmm.
And then very quickly, Jamie believed it. And I would say within I think it was about a week or so, I was able to do my very first out call.
Okay.
So it was very, very, very quickly that it worked. And, I'm forever grateful for that because I really don't think I would have been able to go on like a full month doing that. I think I definitely would have broke down at one point. And I remember on my very first out call, I oh, I missed an important part of the story. Sorry. So
No, that's fine.
right before my very first out call, I had a client come in and, you know, I did my normal routine of greeting him outside, bringing him upstairs. And as soon as we got upstairs, and I closed the door, he looked at me and he's like, "How old are you?" And I remember just like that panic sort of set in. And of course, like I said, Jamie had his own friends that I would sleep with. It wouldn't always just be through Backpage. So you never like really know what these people's ties are to Jamie, if they know him or what the situation is. So I looked at him and I told him I'm 18. And he looked at me and he's like, "You look kind of young for 18." And I remember just like my eyes starting to like swell up with tears. And I guess it was in that moment where the pieces kind of connected for this guy. And he asked me, he whispered to me, he's like, "Are you doing this willingly? Is there anybody else in the house?" And I remember looking at him and just giving him that kind of like head shake of like,
Hmm.
"No, I'm not okay. I'm not safe." And then
And this is Sam.
yeah.
Sam. Okay.
And basically during this time, I would pretend to have sex with Sam. So we would sit there and like I would moan or, we would move the bed a little bit because he realized very like quickly that I was not there willingly. And he promised that he would pay me the normal rate and he would give me a little bit of extra. So, I could have some money for myself. And he wrote down his number and he told me to hide it. So I cut a little hole in my bra and I hid his number inside my bra. And then he came for as much as he could. It was, a couple times a week he would come and we would do the same routine and he never slept with me. And then on my very first out call, it was to a hotel in Ajax. And this is the first time Jamie had ever trusted me with holding a phone in my hands by myself.
Hmm.
And he gave me a phone and told me to call him if anything bad happens and that they'll be right outside the hotel in their car waiting for me. And Ashley was in the car at this time as well. And I was told which room to go to. So I went up to the room, I knocked on the door. And as soon as I opened the door, the guy introduced himself to me and I walked in. And as soon as they went to close the door, they told me that they were police officers and they just wanted to ask me a few questions and that I wasn't in trouble. And I remember just that sense of like panic because, again, I had already had to sleep with a police officer. So I didn't know if this was a test because in my mind, how could my first out call be police officers? It did not make sense to me.
Yeah.
So I really felt like, my back was up against the wall. I didn't know if these people were, you know, good cops or bad cops at this point. So I lied about my name and my age, and they started asking me questions like, I don't even remember the questions that they were asking me, honestly. But I remember looking at them and just kind of being like, I'm not allowed to answer that question. And in hopes that if it wasn't Jamie's friends, that they would take that as a red flag and they would do something about it. Now, I also know unless you completely disclose to the officer, they can't really do anything in that moment. So they ended up taking my picture while I was there. They had like the full room set up. They had a camera. They had, there was a couple officers in the hotel room. They asked me a bunch of questions. And while they were asking me questions, I texted Jamie and told him that, the police were there and I didn't know what to do. He told me not to say anything to get myself in trouble and that they would meet me down the street. And when I'm done, basically just send them a text or call them and they tell me where to meet them.
Okay.
So as soon as I finished with the police, they let me leave. And I remember standing outside their hotel room and I called Sam because I had his number hidden in my bra. And I told him basically the situation. And I was like, listen, I'm terrified. This is my only chance to get out. I have nowhere to go. I'm at like the Garden Inn in Ajax. Can you come and get me, please? And by, the grace of God, he was there within minutes. And I basically left the phone there.
And Jamie wasn't going to come to the hotel because he thinks cops are there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so you got like this small window in between talking to the police to having to go out to the car. Now is your chance.
Yeah. And so Sam met me in the back of the hotel in his car. And I remember running out to his car and just like throwing the phone and just being like, because I'm so scared they're going to track me. I'm so scared of everything. And even at this point, even though I finally got into the car and I was out, I didn't trust Sam as far as I could throw him. Because again, I have no idea who this man is. So I am absolutely terrified sitting in his car. Everything's running through my mind. I'm like, this guy could be a serial killer. This guy could be one of Jamie's friends, and it could have just been a long ploy. Like, I had no idea what was happening. We get to Sam's house, and I just end up like falling asleep, basically. And very quickly, you know, I ended up telling him another lie about how old I was, but I told him I was 17. And then he had a book on his counter. And I looked at the book and he had never told me his last name at this point. And I saw his first and last name on the book, and my heart sank into my stomach. Um, and I had looked at him and I had asked him, "Do you know Lorenda?" which is my mom's name. And he looked at me with just like fear in his eyes. He's like, "Why? How do you know her?" And I tried to say, "Oh, that's my aunt." And he's like, "Mm." And he's like, "Is your name actually Callie then?" And I was like, "Yeah." So turns out he used to date my mom when I was a child.
Wow.
He dated her for, it was only like a couple weeks, but he ended up leaving her just because she had too many mental health issues and she wasn't good to me. And so in that moment, he went into full panic mode and he was like, "You are so young. You need to turn yourself into children's aid services. You need to go back to school. You deserve a normal life. Like, he's like, this is not it. This is not happening."
Mm-hmm.
And because he wanted me to turn myself in, I had stayed there for a couple weeks. I ended up sobering up at his place, but then I ran away because I didn't want to go back to Children's Aid Services, especially because I was also scared that Jamie might find me again. So,
Based on the history of every guy that comes into your life, I could see why you wouldn't trust people going through all this. But wow, what a small world
yeah.
to just run into somebody like that. Like, that is almost some kind of divine intervention. So,
Yeah, it scared me more than anything, especially because I felt like my two worlds were colliding at that point. And I also didn't want him to go and call my mom and tell her anything because, again, I didn't think she would believe me. And I was just terrified of what would happen if,
mm,
any of this came out. And I also blame myself. During this time, I really did blame myself, thinking I allowed myself to get into the situation. And, I really did put that blame on myself. So,
Well, I think that's a good place to take a pause as we're going to break this into two parts. We've covered a lot of ground, but you aren't out of the woods just yet. So listeners can come back next week for the remainder of your story and the conclusion. And we'll talk about where some of the people in your story, where they are now, and also where you are at in life and how some of your ventures are going. So I'll ask people to make sure they tune in next week. We'll see them there.